Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Daniel Santos. Welcome to my channel. And I'm bringing today a very special guest, a person that was my teacher a few months ago. And I had the pleasure to meet him through another friend. So Dan is here with us today. I will let him introduce himself. And he's been doing amazing work on emotional centered coaching. So he has this organization that he put together called School of Emotions, and it's a worldwide class type of work. So we are very happy to have him here. And today we're going to discuss the role of emotions in coaching, but the role of emotions in our lives. So it's going to be a conversation, and very happy to have you here join us, Dan. So
Thank you, Daniel. It's great to be here. So very nice.
thank
Yeah.
you, thank you. So I'm very curious if you can share with us a little bit about yourself, right? Your life, your career, and how you came up, into the journey of deep diving into the emotions.
Mhm. Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So maybe we work backwards. So I'm an American, as you know, and you can hear, but I live in Spain. I live in southern Spain, and I came here in 2012. So the first thing is, since then, my work has really been focused on emotions and emotional literacy. But if we move backwards in time, I spent time training coaches and being a coach. So for the last 20 years or so. And part of that I did in the U.S. and then I moved here, and now this is my home. But before that, I spent about 20 years in business at various levels. So I was a cabinet maker for some years, and then a project manager, and then a director of a group, and then helped start some companies. So, one of the lovely things for me was having that experience at many different levels in organizations, because one of the things I discovered that's related to my work now is that depending on where we are in an organization or where we are in life, we actually live in a different set of emotions. So it's quite interesting. It's not just about money or position or authority, but our mood and our emotions have a lot to do with where we end up in an organization, what role we play, and how successful we are. But prior to all of that, when I was a child, I had the opportunity to live overseas. So my parents took us to Africa for a couple of years, and then we lived in Switzerland for a couple of years. And later, I spent a year in Israel as a wandering student because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. So I've had this really lovely opportunity in my life to live in other cultures, to travel widely, and now to work with people in every part of the world. And as much as COVID is really a tragedy for us as human beings, I also see it opening up opportunities. And one of those is because we're online with everything now, we can have these conversations, we can do this learning globally, which for me is fantastic. I love that aspect to it.
Mhm. Do you remember, like, if you can share a little bit with us, like your childhood experience? I think you mentioned you were in Africa.
Mhm.
Anything in particular that grabbed your attention in terms of the culture, or even I think now looking with the lenses of someone who pays so much attention to the emotional, right,
Mhm.
domain? What do you notice there?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I noticed a couple things. One, how it had an impact on me, which was, I'm fairly introverted, so I'm not, wildly outgoing. But one of the things that happened for me was I think that it elevated my sense of what we could call shyness or timidity, if we want to think about an emotion, to where I tended to, step back, to wait to see if things were safe before I engaged, because I was always the new kid. I didn't always speak the language. Sometimes I was a different color, but I certainly had different habits and different ways of seeing things than other people. So I think for me, it had a big impact in how I actually showed up in the world. But on the other hand, one of the things I learned through all of my experiences living places is that, first of all, related to emotions, is that every human being has emotions. We're just emotional beings. And the other thing is that, what every human being I've ever met is trying to do is the same. We're just trying to make a good life. And part of making a good life depends on our ability to understand and work with emotions, our own and other people's, and to get the information they're giving us, the guidance that they're trying to give to us, and to not, for me, I think it's important to be really clear that my emotions aren't any better or worse than anybody else's. So to not judge me or to not judge other people. And one of the things I find in Spain is that, well, of course, the mood here is different than it is in the US. And I think it's fine to notice that and, try to understand it and work with it. But for me, it's more of a window into understanding people than it is a basis for judgment. Yeah. It's different. It may be uncomfortable for me at times. But on the other hand, this is the way people have learned to live here and to solve their problems in life. And a lot of that comes not just from our intellect, but from our emotional, I would say, competence and understanding.
Mhm. Yeah, it's beautiful these examples you are bringing. It reminds me a situation that I had once. So, well, I'm from Brazil. I think you guys watching here know and probably noticed by the accents. Although some people sometimes think I'm from Germany because I don't look like a traditional Brazilian. Um, but I remember like the time I was working in the UK. So in 2011, I went to spend 1 year in the UK from Brazil. So very different cultures. And I was with my wife at that time. We didn't have our daughter. And the beginning, in particular, was struggling because the culture is so different, and emotionally, it has an impact, right? I remember this thing around like even saying hello to people at the office. It's very
Mhm.
different, right? Like in Brazil, you hug people sometimes, like you kiss them on the cheek, or And in the UK, it was like shaking hands and sometimes nothing, right? Imagine now after COVID, it's gonna be like okay. And then I took vacation. So I was there in the UK for like 3, 4 months. And then I took vacation and I went with my wife and my parents. I took my parents from Brazil to Portugal because my
Mm.
family, part of the family, is from Portugal. And it was a beautiful trip. We had the chance to visit the house where my grandmother lived, like in the early 20th century and all of that. And it's a little bit countryside of Portugal. It's not Lisbon, so it looks like they are living the same life, um, of the farm and all that. Is a beautiful place. But I noticed that, so the family organized a dinner for us, and we were there celebrating. And my uncles and the family guys from Portugal, they were talking to us like this. I was feeling okay. This guy's gonna kiss me, because he was talking to me like
Mhm.
here,
Mhm.
completely the opposite from the British, right?
Mhm.
So that created lots of emotional reactions. I think to me, curiosity, but being uncomfortable sometimes, right? So
And one of the things, and people ask me this often, is what is the relationship between culture and emotions? And one of the things I would say is that I think in every culture is, we have the full range of emotions, but certain cultures tend to privilege one emotion or another, or there's certain emotions that are forbidden, they're taboo, we just don't express those. And sometimes we even feel guilt or shame because we experience that particular emotion. An example for me is it's so clear to me as an American is that in the US is that ambition is an emotion that's embraced. It's I wouldn't say worshiped, but it's held in very high esteem. It's very important as an emotion. And in fact, people will say, oh, that person's not very ambitious. What's wrong with them? Yeah. It's just the way in which, we see things in the US without noticing. In Spain, I would say it's very different. It's not that ambition doesn't exist, but it's not the underlying emotion that drives the culture. And I think this is fascinating to begin to see is that, every culture has their relationship with emotions, their level of expression, their, what's accepted, what's forbidden. But one of the things I see is that every culture still has the full range. It's just that let's like keys on a piano, we play, we may play the emotions a little bit differently, but as human beings, we have the full range. So I think one thing that's valuable to see culturally is that, we talk about Italians like, oh, they're very emotional. Well, having lived in Italy for a while and coached Italians, what I can tell you is that, yes, it's very accepted. In fact, it's even expected that you'll have that level of expression, but that shouldn't be confused with being emotionally literate and really understanding emotions. Because in my experience, Italians are no more emotionally literate than anybody else. And on the other side, having worked in Canada and lived in Minnesota, where people don't express emotions openly, then I would say, well, we might make the mistake of thinking those people don't have certain emotions. But I would say, I don't think that's correct. I think they do, but we've developed a way individually and culturally of living those emotions or expressing those emotions, and that we can strengthen them, or we can um, let them fade. We can not put attention on them, but it's really up to us based on how we want to live emotionally.
Yes, yes. And I think you are bringing two very important concepts, if you can share with the audience here, Dan. So one is emotional literacy, right? So if you
Mhm.
can talk a little bit more about that, I love the analogy that okay, we have literacy in the language we speak or mathematics, but what
Mhm.
about emotional literacy? And the other one that you spoke a while ago is about the distinction between moods and emotions.
Mm. Yeah, sure. Well, the way I think about emotional literacy is that its role is to help us leverage our emotional intelligence, or our EQ. Yeah. In the same way that if you think about linguistic literacy, reading and writing, it's the same thing. Why do we learn to read and write? Well, we do it because we have this intellect that we want to take advantage of. And reading and writing are the tools that allow us to do that, not just to express ourselves, but also to expand what we know intellectually. So for me, emotional literacy is quite similar, is that, we all have emotional intelligence at some level. We have some capacity for emotions. But what emotional literacy allows us to do is have a tool where we can intentionally develop our emotional competence, our emotional understanding, and turn emotions into a tool that we can use in daily life, a life skill, you could say, just like we have done with literacy, with reading and writing. And I came across some interesting statistics that say that probably 200 years ago, probably about 10% of human beings had some level of literacy, could read and write. And today, that number is something around 85%. It's very high. In fact, it's become common sense in the world. If you think about when people send you an email or a text, they don't call you first to say, hey, Daniel, can you read? Because I'm going to send you an email. They just assume that you can. And when we go to restaurants, right, they don't ask you if you're literate before they give you a menu. They just assume that you can read. It's common sense. But emotions are still held like something odd or strange or embarrassing or to be avoided. And I think this is a kind of myth or a traditional way of seeing emotions. It's not particularly useful, but it's what we've grown up with. So it's just the way we relate to emotions. But what I would suggest is we have a choice, right? We can say, nope, you know what? I get there's value here, and it was never offered to me by my parents or in school, but I can still choose to learn in this area because I think it would help me live a better life. So for me, that's why emotional literacy. And I'm a practitioner, I'm not a scholar. There are people who write about this and are studying neuroscience, and I think that's brilliant, but it's not really me. It's not what I love to do. What I love to do is help people build their basic understanding of emotions and really develop emotions as a tool. That's what I do, and that's what the School of Emotions is committed to.
Yes. Yes, yes, absolutely. And you created a one of the reasons I said, oh no, I need to invite Dan to have this conversation. It's that in my experience, I mean, with coaching, with self development, because many times I try to avoid the word coaching, right? I think we spoke a little bit that coaching, unfortunately, become a detractor word because many people don't understand what it is, or many people are doing coaching, and I'm not going to call these things coaching, but in the pure sense, in the really deep sense of development, I was very, excited and impressed with the way you approach emotions, the way you look at emotions. So the whole distinction that you created around every emotion has a story, right? An impulse and a purpose. So if you can talk about that and
Yeah.
maybe give us an example around one emotion in particular.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Well, what's interesting when you begin to spend time looking at emotions and trying to understand them is what I discovered is there's no universal agreement on even what an emotion is. So if you Google what is an emotion, you'll get various answers, but I don't think we as human beings share an interpretation. So first of all, even when we say the word emotions, people are thinking about it very differently. So for me, what I think about is if we go to the root of the word emotion, it just simply means that moves you, that puts you in action. We use the word in English motivation, right, to refer to that energy. So I really think of emotions just as that energy that moves us in life. So it transmits whatever we're thinking or planning or considering what our beliefs are into action through the body. So for me, it's a very simple way to think about emotions, and most people that I've worked with can relate to that sensation they have in the body, that feeling, that energy. But the other thing that's interesting is there's no universal agreement on what makes something an emotion or not. Right? How do you know if something's an emotion? Well, I think in the end, each of us is going to have to create our own criteria. And based on, some learning I had previously coming out of the ontological world, is that, one way to think about emotions is that they have at least these three criteria. And one is they have a consistent underlying narrative, meaning there's a story connected with that emotion that doesn't change even though your individual experience might change. So for instance, if you think about the emotion of sadness, right, is that, you may say my dog ran away, somebody else, their grandmother passed away, somebody else can't see their children because of COVID, and they may all say, I feel sad because of this. And all of those experiences sound very different, but there's an underlying narrative, which is you've lost something you care about. Yeah. Because think about it, if your dog ran away, but you hated your dog, you wouldn't feel sad, right? You'd actually be happy. So it has to be you lost something that you care about or cared about. Yeah. So the first piece is this underlying narrative, and every emotion we can investigate what's the consistent message or thinking that's connected with that. The second one is that there's an impulse. So if you think about an emotion like resentment, right? Resentment is always, this is unfair, or I shouldn't have to do this, or why me? But it's about my view of something being unfair. And the impulse is to get even for the unfairness. I remember when we used to work in offices, is that, you think about it, people would steal paper clips or people would steal reams of printer paper. Why did they do that? They didn't need the paper clips. They didn't need that paper. Really, they could buy paper. But sometimes it's because they thought something in their work life was unfair and they wanted to get even for it. So they had this impulse. Yeah. So it's fascinating because we have the impulse to, I don't know, criticize someone or with the impulse to withhold information, but the underlying impulse is to get even. Why? Because we believe something is unfair. And then the third piece is that I think every emotion has a purpose. So if you think about resentment, what's the purpose? Well, the purpose is to help you understand what you believe is fair and unfair. Because if you feel resentment, you believe something is unfair, and then you have an opportunity to do something about it. So you can react, you can try to get even, but another thing you might do is maybe there's a missing conversation. Maybe you have a request. So if we really listen non-judgmentally to the resentment, we'll see that it's trying to help us find a path, let's say, in life. So this is what I find fascinating is we can take every emotion and we can reduce it to, these three elements. And I'm not saying that's the truth. This is the way that I understand emotions and how I separate what is an emotion from what isn't an emotion. But I think that, there are different ways to do that. But if we're going to work with emotions, whether it's just with us or professionally in some way, then we need to be clear. How do we distinguish what is and isn't an emotion? Because let's imagine you're my coachee. I could share this with you and you could say, okay, I can go with that. All right. So we can build a shared interpretation. Or you might say, oh, well, no, I don't. I think there's another piece. Okay, great. Well, let's add another piece if we need to, but somehow we need to get to a shared interpretation so we can have a productive conversation about whatever emotion we're having a conversation about.
Mhm. You talk a lot about recognizing the emotion. Don't judge, right? Let's
Mm.
pay attention. What's happening here? What's my emotion? Let me not judge. Let me try to understand. Okay, what's this emotion telling me? What is
Mm.
important to me? And maybe I need to change course. Maybe I need to do something a little bit different, right?
Mhm.
Um, as I was talking to friends and colleagues before I recorded here and reflecting on my own journey about emotions, I think a topic that is very consistent is that since we were kids, we were kind of taught to deal with our emotions in a way to avoid, right?
Mhm.
Especially avoid what we label like negative emotions. So
Mhm.
I clearly remember when I was a kid, like for example, every emotion related to arguing, and having different opinions, and eventually having a discussion was quickly avoided in my family. So
Mhm.
was all about no, 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 we are not arguing. Okay, we are in peace and all of that. So that created, I think, some kind of dynamic where sometimes I tend to see arguments where, in fact, they are just a different opinion. They are not a huge conflict.
Mhm.
And that was one important thing. The other thing that I've seen a lot in myself and other people is like, as you said, nowadays with the quarantine, loneliness, right? We get
Mhm.
lonely, and sometimes I pay attention to myself and I say, okay, if I go in the automatic pilot, my automatic pilot is okay, ignore the
Mhm.
loneliness because it will pass. Pay attention in other stuff, do more stuff, work more, right?
Mhm.
What have you seen? Like, is that a little bit like common how people deal with their emotions and
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of traditional ways that we've learned about. Either somebody's taught us something or we just, it's what we made sense of in some way about emotions. But I think sometimes they're not particularly helpful. I think one is this idea that there are inherently positive and negative emotions. And in fact, often when I work with people, I just tell them to imagine you have a basket of good emotions and what would you put in there? And they can always name, da 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 da, And okay, you got a basket of the bad emotions or the negative emotions, and what would you put in there? And it's really clear to people. So one of the things that I think is enormously helpful is to break that myth that there are inherently good and bad emotions or positive and negative. Fear keeps you safe. It keeps you from, standing in the middle of the street or look both ways when you're going to cross the street. But fear can also keep you from doing things you really want to do, right? So it can deprive you of some experience in life that in fact, your life is poorer because you didn't do that. So would you call fear a good emotion or a bad emotion, or positive or negative? Well, it depends on the situation. So the way I tend to approach emotions is to think about them either serving you in that situation or not serving you. So one of the things is that we have learned to many times to do exactly what you say, is to deny our emotions, or to we stuff our emotions, or push them down, or distract ourselves in some way. And I think that, well, okay, that's a mechanism, that's a coping mechanism. The problem with that is that I don't see that the emotion necessarily disappears. It's still there, but we've kind of stopped the flow of it. So one of the things that we can develop is a different relationship with emotions. So instead of trying to control them, which is mainly how we talk about emotions, although I don't know anybody who's ever been able to do that, is to think about maybe a different relationship with emotions would be learning to navigate them. Learning that I don't have to control them, is that imagine yourself sitting by a stream and watching your emotions go by. You don't have to grab them out of the stream and do something with them. You could just notice, wow, look, I'm feeling irritated. Look, I'm feeling annoyed. Look, I'm feeling lonely. And that will actually allow the emotion to then move and shift to something else. Because, yeah, you feel lonely for a period of time, but if you believe that emotions come and go, which I think they do, then, at some point that loneliness will disappear. You'll get a text from me and you'll go, oh, I'm not alone in the world. Look, Dan wants to talk to me. Or something will happen, right? Your dog will come up and want you to take it for a walk, and then you won't feel as lonely. So I think that if we can allow ourselves to stop resisting as much and just notice what's there, and then to get very curious. What's it doing? Why do I feel lonely in this moment? What's it trying to tell me? Is it serving me? Because if it's serving me, like, I think sadness serves us. It tells us what we care about. But, you don't want to live your whole life in sadness. At some point, you may say, okay, I get it. I get the message. And now I'm going to move to some other emotion, right? I'm going to, generate a little excitement in my life, or I'm going to generate a little inspiration. I'm going to go do a painting. Yeah. Okay. Well, you can choose to shift your emotions. But I think this idea that we are emotional beings is really helpful to embrace. And the analogy that I find useful is to think about emotions in the same way that I think about sleep or breathing, is that as human beings, we sleep. We don't have a choice. You can resist sleeping, but at some point you will sleep. So what options do you have? Well, you can decide when to sleep, where to sleep, how to sleep. Right? You have lots of latitude in your choices around sleep. You just don't get to decide if you sleep. And the same with breathing, same with, taking nourishment through food. I mean, there's things we just don't get to choose if we do. And emotions are one of those for me. So I think that we're better off to focus on learning, well, how much influence can I have, right? How can I use them as a tool, rather than trying to resist something that's really not resistible in the long run. We will feel emotions, we will experience them. So why not learn something about them? Why not get better at them rather than trying to make them go away, which is what many of us learned, me included. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, wonderful. So the things you are telling me, it instantaneously bring to me like a lot of suffering that I've seen in myself and in others, and people that work with me around. They need to be happy all the time. They need to be motivated, excited, right? I think there's a lot to do with social media. We go on social media, we go on Instagram, Facebook, we look at everyone's life, it's perfect. And even in the corporate world, I mean, there's this thing, yes, I'm noticing over the last 10, 20 years, yes, let's talk a little bit more about emotions, but it's almost like a rule, right? Let's only talk about the good emotions.
Yeah.
Are we motivated? Are we productive? Da,
Yeah.
da, 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 da,
Yeah.
da. So how do you see that? Do you see, for example, across your clients, this dictatorship, happiness dictatorship, right? Need. And how do you see that also in particular in Spain versus the US, for example? What's their relationship with, oh, I need to be happy, I need to be motivated?
Yeah. Well, as I said, there are certain emotions that are privileged by different cultures. And I mean, think about there's a famous document in the US that says, the pursuit of, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I mean, it's written into the Constitution, if I'm not wrong, or the Declaration of Independence. But, think about it. It's a fundamental belief in the US that, well, that's the goal, to be happy. And that's not true in every culture. I would say in this culture where I live now in Spain, I would say there's much more focus on, I would say, joy and contentment than happiness. Now, if you can't distinguish between those three, if one can't, then of course you won't see the difference. But I would say that enjoyment has to do with celebrating life, right? To enjoy yourself has this impulse to celebrate life. So I think here people do that when they can in quiet ways. They go out and have a glass of wine, they go have coffee, they spend time together, and that produces this kind of joy. We're celebrating life together. So I think that, one thing that's very helpful is it puts us in choice when we understand emotions, is that there may be this cultural energy to embrace ambition and happiness, but I still get to decide as an individual how much those serve me and how much those don't, right? How it's kind of like, well, in the US, there's a big energy around, pursuit of material things or money, but still you as an individual get to decide how much are you going to commit to those activities. It's up to you. Yeah. And the same here, right? I don't have to embrace joy and contentment if I don't want to, but I can. It's an option for me. So again, I think that the deeper we go into this, the better we understand ourselves, the better we'll understand everything that's happening around us, both individually and collectively, and the greater choice we have in these. So that's how I see it. I see emotions as a tool. It's not that we should embrace emotions. It's an opportunity. It's a gift that we have, but most of us haven't yet unwrapped that gift. We haven't seen them as a gift. I had a fascinating experience when my wife and I started the first book, The Unopened Gift. Is my editor said, I want you to go out, find all the books about emotions that are somewhat similar, and tell me what's so special about yours. What's so different about yours? Because there's already a lot of books about this. And so I did. I was a good student, and I followed her suggestion. And one of the things I found was that the mood of most of the books I found was a kind of resignation. Yeah, it was, well, we're condemned to have emotions. We're burdened with emotions as human beings, but we can live a good life in spite of that. And I thought, I don't believe that. I believe they're a gift. I believe that, the right mood for us to approach emotions in is gratitude, that we've been given this capacity, this possibility. We don't even know by whom or from where, but still we each have it. But what we haven't done is we haven't unwrapped it. We haven't taken a look. We haven't investigated. We haven't seen it as a legitimate domain of learning. And nobody has shown us a path, right? We haven't seen a clear path. You want to learn mathematics, there's a clear path. There are tutorials and guides, and they teach in school. But you want to learn how to use emotions in a practical way, where are you going to turn for that, right? There's just not resources for that as there are with other things. So this is the work now, yeah, because I think all of us are seeing that, being intelligent and developing our intellect is another phenomenal gift, but it's not enough, right? If we want to live a really full, abundant life, we need to embrace emotions too, because if we don't, then it's like we have one flat tire on the car. We're trying to go places, but it could be so much better. And for most of us, that takes a change in the way we understand emotions or think about emotions or relate to emotions.
Reflecting on what you said, like it's not a good versus a bad emotion. It's, does this emotion serves me or not in the
Mm-hmm.
situation I'm living, in the, in the day I'm having and all of that. But I think at the same time, this is so entrenched into us, right? So if I think about like sadness, it's so entrenched that it's, oh no, it's a negative emotion and you should
Mm-hmm.
not be sad, that I think it's very natural that we feel shame, right? And I say no, and guilt, and make you, maybe you can make a distinction between shame and guilt, but like it's almost like the exercise you gave the other day about noticing our emotions and say, okay, what I'm feeling, let's just me
Yeah.
put on the notebook here without judging, right?
Yeah.
But I noticed that, okay, if I wrote down an emotion that I label as negative, I was feeling bad about that.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind
Yeah.
of expands the pain.
So sometimes the way I think about it is we have emotions about our emotions. So for instance, for some people, let's say you feel a little greedy at some point and you take the last piece of food. Well, then, instead of just saying, oh, I feel greedy, I'm going to take the last piece of food, you may feel embarrassment about your greed, right? So what happens is we get caught sometimes in the embarrassment rather than really understanding that what was driving our behavior was greed. So we have these all the time. We have emotions about our emotions. We have judgments about our emotions. But I think the non-judgmental approach is fantastic, and to be really curious, what's it doing for me? So, your question is great about shame and guilt, because we often confuse them, and this is okay. This is part of emotional literacy. Can we distinguish between these two? And shame for me is when I break the rules of the community in some way. So, of my family, or of the nation, or of my city, or the company I work with, and sometimes we do that, not even out of choice, but we do it because we have some desire in some way. I mean, imagine, let's say you grew up in a family where everybody's a blue collar worker, right? Everybody, they got done with high school, they went to work. Yeah. And that's just the way it is in your family culture. And you come along and you have a real desire to go to university. Wow, interesting dilemma, right? Because the moment that you say, I want to go to university, you may be breaking one of the rules of that community. And then you actually may feel shame. You may not want to say that to people because you're afraid you'll get punished for it. But on the other hand, guilt is when we don't live in alignment with our values. So you have this desire to go to college, but you don't tell anyone, right? Well, it wouldn't be surprising if you had some guilt about that. Why? Because you have this desire, this belief that it's, what you should do, it's a good thing, but you're not acting on it. You're behaving counter to your internal values. So what's interesting is guilt, although it has terrible press. We always talk really negatively about guilt. But I'll give you an example. I had a coachee who came to the session. I had given him in the previous session something to read that he had asked for. So I sent him this short white paper. The first thing he said when he got on the coaching session was, "Oh man, I feel so guilty because I didn't read the paper." And I'm like, "That's great." Well, why would I say that's great? Because he didn't do what he promised to do. But what his guilt told me was that he cares about his promises. It's important to him to make and keep commitments. And all he was doing was acknowledging that he made a commitment, he didn't keep it, and that produced this emotion of guilt. Well, how useful is that? I think it's fantastically useful if we don't judge ourselves wrong for feeling guilt. It's just trying to give us information. So this is the value I see, is that it allows us to make choices in a different way. It allows us to understand ourselves differently. and actually to value ourselves more, I think, because the guilt is telling me something important. The shame is telling me something important. I care about those rules of the group, of the community, or of my friends, or if it's just you and me as friends, right? If I feel shame because I didn't do something that we've agreed as a standard between us, what does it say? Well, I think that's important. So this is the thing for me is if we judge it, we'll throw it out because why? It's a bad emotion. It doesn't feel good. I don't even want to think about it. But if we quit judging it, then it can get really interesting because we can get curious. Like, why do I feel guilt about not reading this paper? It's no big deal. It's just a paper. Because it's not about the paper. It's about your commitments and how seriously you hold those.
Hmm. Wow. Fantastic, fantastic, Dan. You know, we could stay here hours talking because that's
We
such
could. It's true.
such a wonderful topic, and yeah, I think you bring in a way that shows up so easily to implement, right? So practical, and
Thank
I
you.
think that's that in itself. It's a gift. It's a gift because it makes us have a healthy relationship, practical relationship with emotions,
Yeah.
non-judgmental,
Yeah.
and say, okay, you know, they are telling me something. What can I do with that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, tell more to all of us here where people can find you and the offers that you have. I think you have several offers that are very
Yeah.
interesting in terms of courses and programs and books
Yeah.
and all of that.
Yep. Well, one place is you can go to schoolovemotions.world, and that's the website, which is under reconstruction. So there's going to be a lot of new things, but there's blogs there, and I'm going to add videos, and you can buy the books there. But there's several books, and one book is a primer on emotional literacy, so how to understand it, and that's called The Unopened Gift. And another is this, which is called The Field Guide to Emotions. And it has an in-depth look at about 150 emotions. So if you're feeling an emotion and you're not really clear what it is, you can, take a look at the field guide to help identify it. But I also teach courses, like you said, on emotion-centered coaching. I have a course on just the book study, so where we just go through the book and study it in depth. And I have a new course called Innovate Your Life, which combines innovation tools or models with emotions and emotional literacy. So there's many possibilities, and they're listed on the website, but also people can write to me. I'm happy to have a conversation directly, and I'm just Dan at schoolovemotions.world. So very easy to find. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. So really, the thing for me is if anybody's interested, there's so many ways that you can begin your journey here. You can read a book, you can watch a video, you can watch this interview, we can have a conversation, you can join a group. There's so many possibilities. But I think the first step is recognizing that there's something of value for you to learn here and connecting with your desire, your belief that it'll improve your life in some way. And then to, take the first step because that's what gets us on the path. So I don't think that, it took me 20 years, 25 years to get where I am from zero. And everybody can grow in this area, but I think you have to see the value of it, the need, and feel some desire to do it. And then once you do, you just stay in the conversation and you keep looking for ways to learn.
Yes, fantastic. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
courses are amazing. I joined one course, guys, and very easy to join as well. Even now, working virtually, we did the program over Zoom, and you share all the materials and all of that. That's one thing I noticed. I think you're one of your emotional states, right? You are very open, and you naturally build connection with people. So I think that's wonderful for all of you that are watching. Dan is definitely a fantastic resource for you guys at individual level, for you guys at collective level. So we could talk a lot about here how emotions influence the teams, right? The organizations. What's the emotional state of a group of people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've done a lot of work with teams, with organizations, done leadership development training all around emotions. And, it makes a fantastic difference because, every leader and every person on every team we work with is very intelligent. They're very well trained technically, but what's really missing often is what I would call relational skills. And those are largely based in emotions. And so I think that when people begin to develop this on this side, it amplifies what they're already able to do on the other side. It allows different conversations and coordination. So I think it's for everybody, whether they're educators, leaders, work on a team, technician, it doesn't matter. We all have emotions. We can all learn something from them. So yeah. So I'll just conclude my part by saying, a lot of times people ask me, so why emotion? Why do you do this? What is it? What are you after? And I think that what fuels me is that they made such a difference in my life. I would say 25 years ago, I was completely emotionally ignorant and illiterate. Like I really didn't know anything about emotions. And little by little, I've begun to build an understanding based on me primarily, because what I discovered was, oh, if I could apply it to me, if I could understand it in me, then it helped me understand you and everybody else. So the rest of the world started making a lot more sense to me, but it's radically changed my life. So that's one of the reasons I do it. But my vision is we begin to see emotions as normal, just like eating and breathing and sleeping. And that emotional literacy becomes common sense. It's just something we do as human beings, something we engage in, and we quit seeing it as something strange or embarrassing or even useless, as many of us have seen it in the past. I think it's a tremendous, territory for growth for all of us, and I include myself. I feel like I'm learning every day, and I just invite everybody to join that pursuit.
Nice. Thank you so much, Dan. It's
Yeah.
really a gift to have you here. And for those who watched, please subscribe to the channel, share the video with your friends, with your communities, and stay in touch with us. You can reach out to Dan. I'm going to put the website here as well. And more to come on the channel. Thank you so much, Dan.
Beautiful. Thank you, Daniel. It was great.